Hello, friends. I'm Dionysium Chairman Buzz Moran. In these difficult times, it's important to remember that we're all in this together, somehow, now more than ever, if at all. Now, our next guest, Mr. Kevin Garcia, is a certified educator and professional writer whose work has appeared in the Associated Press and Marvel Comics. He gives a variety of workshops, moderates panels, and teaches journalism and graphic design at the Liberal Arts and Science Academy right here in Austin, Texas. His work can be found at kevingarcia.com and monomythic.com, both utilizing the www. Prefix. Here to present Party Like It's 1454, the public health disaster that changed the Aztecs forever. Please silently make some virtual noise for Mr. Kevin Garcia.
Salutations. I am a teacher and a professional journalist, and for a long time I was a writer and researcher with Marvel Comics, where my job was to write and research, along with the whole team of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, various superheroes, and I liked doing a lot of the Mesoamerican gods, the Aztec and Mayan gods. Hold on a second, let me go back and introduce myself again. There's my name, as you can all see. If you can't read that, that would be my name written in Mayan phonetically. If you were to write your name in Mayan phonetically, which of course the Mayans wouldn't do, close you can get to it, Kevin Garcia. And I want to talk to you guys about Mayans, Aztecs, Mesoamericans, all those kinds of things. Specifically, I want to talk to you about the years, the dates, and what that means. Could you imagine, for example, believing that an entire year was cursed? That would never happen in today's world. Anyway, there's this great video online. You can find it on YouTube, and I'm just going to put a little piece of it here to help illustrate what I'm talking about. And that didn't work. Put a little piece of it here to illustrate what I'm talking about. And the Mayans and Aztecs and a lot of the Mesoamerican cultures were very, very meticulous when it came to tracking the years. And they would track dates not like we would. So you wouldn't have, for example, November 1st, November 2nd, November 3rd. Instead, you'd have November 1st, December 2nd, January 3rd, and so on like that. And that's how they'd measure their dates. And if these dates seem very important or very familiar to you, that's because, well, several years ago, there was a big hullabaloo about 2012. People were very, very convinced that the entire world was going to end in 2012. And when I say people, I really mean everybody but the Mayans. In fact, I distinctly remember there being a reporter who went down to the Yucatan and interviewed modern day Mayans and asked them, are you guys worried about 2012? And the Mayans said, why? What's happening in 2012? Of course, what we were talking about was the long count date, which is the way that Mayan historians would track dozens and dozens of years. This is, for example, my birthday in Mayan. So if my birthday comes around again, you guys are more than welcome to get me gifts. Anyway, the thing is that December 21st, 2012 was the anniversary. It was the start of a new Baktun. It was the 13th Baktun. It's essentially like the millennium for Christians, which had exactly that same amount of religious importance. So it wasn't really a big deal to them, but for a lot of people who were not Mayans, they thought the world was going to end. In fact, I was teaching high school at the time, and my students were very, very convinced that the world was going to end. And they told me flat out, like, why should I bother? You know, in a few months, the world's going to end, that nothing matters anyway. I told my students, I'll make you a bet. If the world ends December 21st, I will owe each of you $1 million. If the world doesn't end, you each owe me $1 million. They're like, yeah, oh, wait, no. And you know, it went on like that. And of course, the world didn't end. But my personal theory is that YOLO was only a thing because of 2012. Because for that entire year, people were saying YOLO like it actually mattered. And then afterwards, no one ever said it again. Or if they did, it was ironic at best. But, you know, those are the Mayans. We're talking about the Aztecs. Under either Mayan or Aztec calendars, my birthday would be 6 Jaguar. In fact, I've had people ask me, oh, what's your sign? You know, and I'm not Greek and I'm not Chinese, so I don't really give them a Chinese or Greek horoscope, but my, you know, ancestors would have said 6 Jaguar, so I go with that birthday. And for the Mayans and the Aztecs, your birthday or in some cultures, the day that you would essentially be baptized, to use a Western term, would become your new name. So my name would essentially be Six Jaguar, and then it would relate to other things about me. I'm from the Rio Grande Valley. I love books, so my name could be Six Jaguar Valley of Books, and that could work, you know. But the date I want to talk to you guys about right now is not a day, but a year, and it is a cursed year. It is the year of one rabbit, and one rabbit is important for a lot of reasons. For many, many years, it was considered a holy and sacred year, but toward the end of the Aztec Empire, it was considered a horrible, horrible time to exist. To explain why, I need to go back to the beginning, the very beginning. So for a lot of the Mesoamerican cultures, the Aztecs, the Mayans, related cultures, there was this belief that there were a successive number of worlds. And as each world would end, the next one would begin. For the Aztecs, each world lasted 676 years and was ruled over by a sun, which was the god representing the sun, giving light to the people and allowing things to exist. When the fourth sun ended and the fifth sun was beginning, the gods said, we need the best sun ever to become our new light. And they asked the most beautiful of all young gods, a young man named Tequestecatl. And Tequestecatl, he was born naturally handsome. You can tell by his amazing teeth right there. He was beautiful, he was handsome, he was strong, he was powerful, he was courageous. And they said, Tequestecatl, will you be the next sun? And he says, yes, I can do this. And to prepare, he would fast and he would pray and he would do penance and he would give blood sacrifices. Now, Tequestecatl was this perfect young man, but he had a brother, Nana Watson. I don't speak Nahuatl for the record. Nana Watson was not perfect. He was born flawed. He was born enfeebled. He was born deformed, and he knew it. But he worshiped his brother, and he knew his brother was destined for great things. So going along and supporting his brother, he also fasted. He also prayed. He also gave penance because he knew that this was a great time for his brother, and he was going to be right by his side. Finally, the day came, and the gods created a massive, massive fire. And they told Tequestecatl, jump in, become the next sun. And Tequestecatl said, I am ready. And he got right up to the fire, and he goes, oh, dang, that's kind of hot, isn't it? I don't know if I feel like going in there right now. And they said, jump. Oh, yeah, of course. Maybe if I give it a running start. So he backed up. I'm going to, whoa, I almost fell in. You don't want to start a new sun by falling in. It's a horrible way to start a new sun. Give me a second. What if I back into it a little bit? Now, the gods were getting annoyed. They said, this is taking way too long. You cannot start a sun late. So they asked Nana Watson, who had done all of the same preparation, will you be the sun? Without hesitation, he jumped into the fire. And he became the most beautiful and bright sun that the gods had ever seen. Tequestecatl saw that and goes, well, it wasn't so hard. I can do that. He jumped in too. So now we had two suns. Now the gods were annoyed. There was no reason to have two suns. So the gods took a rabbit, spun it by its ears, tossed it up at the sun, spoilers, smacked Tequestecatl right in his dumb face, knocking out a lot of his light and making him the moon. So that is why you have a sun and a moon, according to the Aztecs, and also why they would associate rabbits with the moon. And actually, a lot of Mesoamerican cultures associate rabbits with the moon, which is another connection, I think, with Southeast Asia, which I think is very, very interesting and neat. Now, the people of Mesoamerica, the Aztecs especially, believed that it was important to renew this promise of creating a sun to make sure that this would exist. So just as the Mayans had that Baktun anniversary, the Aztecs had this anniversary that was every 52 years. They would have a new fire ceremony to make sure the sun would keep burning and that we would not have to go into the sixth sun, that we could keep existing in this fifth sun that we have right now. Now, they believed that as you got to the end of this 52-year cycle, the last dozen days or so would become very, very unlucky days. These were bad days to be born. If you were born there, they wouldn't baptize you till afterwards because those are bad days to be. That is when the veil between our world and other worlds is weakest. So demons would come through, horrible spirits, bad creatures and monsters. Now, only the strongest and bravest men would stand out and watch, preparing for the new sun. But all of the other fires in the community were put out. So for days before this event, all fires were put out. People would fast. People would destroy their pottery. They would destroy their cooking utensils. They would destroy even the idols of the gods because they said, this is from the old time. We need to toss it all out. And they would throw these things away. Now, for those who were not strong, the pregnant women, the children, they would make masks of maguey leaves and they would be protected and they would hide in the darkness, hoping the demons would not reach them. And then the day would come. As the dawning of the new year would come, they would prepare the new fire in the most Aztec way possible by ripping open a man's chest, taking out his beating heart, starting a fire in that chest cavity, burning the heart in that fire, and then using that fire to light all the fires of the community. Priests would take fires from that new fire to each of the four corners of the town, of the community, and there would be a massive, massive celebration, a massive party that covered the land, because now the sun is continuing to burn, the earth is continuing to spin, we are going to be okay. This was called the New Fire Ceremony. Direct translation comes out to something like a tying of years or a binding of years. But the trouble is that this year was supposed to be one rabbit. And in 1454, as the Westerners would call it, one rabbit was a particularly bad year. There was a drought, crops didn't grow, trees withered, there was famine, people were suffering, people were starving. And the king, Montezuma I, knew that this was not the time to have a celebration. It was unfair to ask people who were already starving to fast. It was just unrealistic to ask people who had nothing to throw a party. So he said, that's it. We're going to move the date. It will not be on one rabbit. Instead, it will be on two reed. So by holding it the next year, people were able to actually prepare. The drought ended. People could actually have food before, fasting. And it worked out. Now, of course, the previous date was tied very, very closely to the patron god of the Aztecs, Huitzilopochtli, the god of war. Two reed is actually closely associated with Tezcatlipoca, who I like to call kind of the Aztec Loki. He's extremely powerful, but a very cruel god. And let's just say that moving the date was seen as kind of a bad sign, because the next time in the 52-year cycle that one rabbit came around, there was again a massive famine, starvation, suffering. And the new king, the grandson of the previous Montezuma II, also knew that they would have to change the date, and they moved it to reed. Now, the thing is, moving a date, moving events, imagine being forced to move sporting events or things like that because of some kind of crisis. That would never happen in the modern day. Now, moving events was important, but it was also scary, because for people like Montezuma and for a lot of his followers, there was this thought that omens and signs could be very, very, very bad for the people. In fact, shortly after this time, he saw a comet in the sky and was convinced, okay, finally things are going to get better for us. But others told him, no, this could be a bad sign. So they had a ceremonial ball game to decide if it was a good sign or a bad sign. He lost. It was a bad sign. And a few years later, the Spaniards showed up. Now, the Spaniards brought with them actual disease and plague, as is the theme of our talk tonight. But the point is that for the Aztecs, and by the way, I say Aztecs, this is a term we use today. They would have called themselves Mexica. But for the Aztecs, for the Mexica, this year of two rabbit just became known as, that is the time of bad stuff. That is when bad things are going to happen. And whenever two rabbit comes around, it's just going to be a sucky year. And guess what? Two rabbit is not 2020. Yeah, good news. Two rabbit is actually 5 years from now. So according to the Aztecs, the really, really bad year is not going to be 2020. It's going to be 2025. But when I say according to the Aztecs, the thing is that as much as we like to think as human beings that, oh, well, this bad thing happens in this year, and that must mean those things are bad, we know, logically that correlation does not equal causation. And in fact, it is not even all the communities from that area that believed that two reed or one rabbit was important. For some of the communities, it was two reed. For the Chichimecs, who the Aztecs would call barbarians, it was 9 flint. For the Acaluas, it would be 1 flint. In fact, for the Totomihuaques, it would be 7 reed, which means 2019 was the year we should have done something to make sure that nothing bad happened. And I'm sure nothing bad happened in 2019. So that's okay. But the point I'm making is that, as human beings, we like to look back and give meaning to things that don't necessarily have meaning. And for the Aztecs, that meaning was in one rabbit. And they believed that one rabbit was a really, really, really bad time. And if you told them that 2020 was going to be really bad and that 5 years later was going to be the next one rabbit, they would have said, told you so. It really leads me to just one conclusion, and that is beware the rabbit. All right. That being said, keeping this short, I actually did not prepare this talk very much in advance. I just started writing it this morning, so I hope it worked out all right. If you'd like to know more about me, I have an eponymous website. Yeah, I bought it for myself. That's a thing. And I also have monomythic.com, which I don't update very often, but you'll see on there interviews and other stories that I will post when I feel like, because no one pays me to do so. But otherwise, that's my talk. So thank you very much.
Okay, great. So we have a few questions that I think you may have touched on later in your talk, but just to
You can always go back to them.
yeah, let's do that. That's perfect. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the Mayan and Aztec calendaring systems?
Well, to be honest, the Mayan and Aztec calendaring systems are not that different.
Okay.
If you're talking about just the day-to-day, you have 20 days, 20 different, mostly animals, but 20 different nouns and 13 numbers. So you would just go, for example, you'd be 1 eagle and then 2 death and then 3 jaguar. That's not the order they go in. I'd have to actually look up to get the order. But for Mayan and Aztecs, for example, I posted up there a website, azteccalendar.com. It's a fun website. And if you go to azteccalendar.com, you can actually type in your own birthday and find out what your day is. But of course, even on azteccalendar.com, it has a little note saying this is the date according to this calculation. And if you click it, you can get a different calculation. So maybe you want to be something different. I will say that while azteccalendar.com and other similar websites will give you kind of a meaning for your name, meaning is what you make of it. So, for example, I've had female young students tell me, "Oh, I don't want to be death. That's a horrible date to be." And I would explain to them that for the Aztecs, death meant life. Similarly, flowers could also represent death and skinning people. So, go any direction. Now, this is distinct, of course, from the long count, which is what the Mayans used for what we thought of as 2012. But that is not really a factor into a religious or other practices. That's really just something used to track history, which is really interesting that they had so much history tracked. I feel like I went off on a rant there.
All right, excellent. So another question that arose is, are there any specific stories of plagues in Aztec mythology?
Yes, but a lot of times the plagues would take the form of great suffering that would happen, and that suffering could come in many different ways. Now, there were demons that were specifically, I say demons, lords of the underworld, that would specifically be named after types of suffering and disease. So, for example, there was one lord of the underworld whose name was like congealed pus. Cats and dogs. So that's a thing. And there was also gods of medicine. Ixtlitzin, I can always say his name wrong, was an Aztec god of medicine. But for the most part, they saw these things not as a medical problem, but as a spiritual one. So, for example, if they failed to get the new sun to come the next morning, what they were worried about arriving in the darkness that would follow is the zitime. There we go. Basically, these are skeletal female demons made of bones and stars, and they would just come and tear everybody apart, and that would be a bad thing. So yeah, they also the idea that certain things could cause bad luck. If you do certain things at night, then bad spirits could get into you. So it wasn't so much a medical situation, although they did have medicine, as it was a spiritual problem.
Okay, so we have time for a very brief question and then one longer question, and then we'll move to our next segment. The question is, where did you get your shirt?
I don't remember.
All right, that was a good short answer.
Most likely it was at some kind of thrift shop. I tend to collect dorky shirts wherever I can.
Outstanding. And then we'll go ahead and wrap up with dun, dun, dun. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the codexes were found that you referred to throughout the talk?
Okay, so I was showing codexes, and I have a few of them here. But the thing with the codexes is that some of them, like for example, the Codex Borgia here, is considered to be pre-conquest. So that means that this is one of the very, very few books that was made prior to the Spanish arriving that we still have access to today. I say few books because while the Mayans and Aztecs and other cultures made dozens, hundreds, thousands of books, they were burnt en masse by the priests. In fact, there were early priests from Spain that believed that saving all of these books was an important part of history. It would help them, convert to Catholicism, but it would also help them keep track of the history of this new land they were in. But then a new priest came along who saw that they were collecting these books and said, this is heresy. Don't do that at all. He burned all of them. So we only have a handful of those pre-conquest books that are left. Now, for the Aztecs, they didn't have a very simple written language. The reason I use the Mayan stuff whenever doing things like names or words is because they had a very straightforward language. The Aztecs did have it, but it's harder for us to decipher because it's not as straightforward. Mayans, who we have also a few books of, they would actually use words and sentences and paragraphs and all that kind of stuff. So it was very, very useful. But the other type of codex that I have is what I would consider to be a post-conquest codex. And these would be ones that were written in collaboration between the priests and the native people. So the native people would do the drawings, and the priests would be writing down notes in Spanish of what these drawings mean. These were not burned as much, so we have many more of these than we did have of the originals. And every bit counts. It's just that, well, stories don't always match. So, for example, one story may have one origin for the sun and moon, another story may have an entirely different origin for the moon.
All right, so it sounds like we have further nerd nights to develop out of that. Thank you so much for